Hello and welcome back to the channel. In this video we will create a to-do application from start to the end in one single video using Angular framework. And it may sound like this is a super small application, but if we will build it correctly, there are a lot of ways to see how Angular can shine in creating applications. So let's jump right into it. So first of all, let's look on the project that we will build. So here I am in todomvc.com, and the idea is that this is the same project with already prepared styles, which will be built in different frameworks or languages. And as you can see here, we have a lot of examples of different frameworks. For example, here is React, and this is how our project is looking like. So here on the left part, we have all sources and links. We can ignore this because this is not a part of the project. But here on the right, we have our to-dos project. So here is the headline, and then we have an input with immediate focus. So when I reload the page, as you can see, I am already focused in this field. Now on hitting enter, we are getting a new item here, so we can just type something and hit enter. Now we see our to-dos that we need to implement, and here on the bottom we have footer with information. So first of all, on the left we have the amount of items, and here we have three filters, so all, active and completed. So we can mark some task as completed, and now as you can see here we can click on active, and then we see only active tasks. So our completed tasks are only being shown in completed filter or in all. Also, we can of course remove from here our to-dos or add new if we want. And here we have toggle all, which means we are marking all our to-dos as completed or uncompleted. So this is the application that we will create together. And actually, if you didn't watch my course Angular for Beginners, or you think you don't have enough knowledge to build an application, I highly recommend to check that video. I will link it here on the top. It has all basic knowledge of Angular that you need to know, because in this video I won't talk deeply about basic features. I will just implement a project and just describe some things that will be interesting. To start implementing this project, we will use Angular CLI to generate a project. So if you don't know what is this is Angular I/O. This is a CLI tool, and here we can click Get Started and then jump to Get Started CLI. So the idea is that we can install globally Angular CLI and then use command line tool in order to generate our Angular application. But first of all, you need to install Node.js on your machine. If you don't have it, you can just jump in nodejs.org and download it here. And I always highly recommend you to use LTS version because it is more stable. And to check if you have Node on your machine, you can just write in console node -version, and I'm getting here 14 something, and actually if you have something higher than 10, you're good to go. So Node is there. Now we need to install Angular CLI. For this you can just copy this command npm install Angular CLI, but I won't run it in my console because I already installed it previously. This is why after installation you can check with ng ---- version, and if you are getting here something like this, it means that everything is installed correctly, because as you can see here is information regarding Angular CLI. So normally, to generate an application with Angular CLI, we're just writing ng new and the name of the project. And this is what you need to do now. But in my case, it will be a little bit different because I already have a folder. As you can see here, I have a folder. It is completely empty. I just have here a git and git ignore. So nothing except of the git. And the problem is that I can't really generate the project with ng new my app because I need to define here that I want to create a project in existing directory. So what I can do is jump to the console and put here an attribute. So as you can see ng new, then the name of the project, this is my app, and here ---- directory, and here should be the path. And for me it will be just a dot because I want to use my current directory. And of course we don't want the name my app, but for example to do MVC. And I'm hitting enter, and now we're getting some questions from Angular. So do we need Angular routing? Yes, of course. This is why I'm hitting yes. What style sheet do we need? Actually, we won't write any CSS because we will use already predefined CSS of Todo MVC project. Now, as you can see, Angular started to install all packages. And at the end, we're seeing something like packages installed successfully and directory is already under version control. Maybe you don't see this message because you are not having directory with initialized Git, which means Angular will create Git for you. Now we need to start our application. So to start the application, we're just running in the console ng serve. Now, as you can see, compiling is finished successfully and we're getting the message Angular Live Development Server is listening on localhost 4200. As you can see, I opened localhost 4200 and here is the boilerplate of Angular. So this is actually a component of Angular which is rendered by default. And here, as you can see, we have Todo MVC app is running, so we're good to go. If you are on this step when everything is generated and you started Angular project with Angular CLI, you are ready to start writing code. And the first thing that I want to do is clean our project. So let's jump here. As you can see, this is the files and the project that was generated by Angular CLI. So here for us is interesting source, app. And here inside app, we have our basic app component. So actually, if we will jump in app component CSS, we don't have anything here, and we can remove this file, because we won't write any global CSS. And I will also remove app component spec.ts and just leave this for files here. Now let's jump in app component TS, and as you can see here we have a basic Angular component with title property. We don't need title property, so let's remove this and jump in app component HTML. As you can see here we have a placeholder with a lot of CSS and some markup on the bottom. So I will remove everything completely from here and just will write h1 tag, and let's close it now. For example, hello Todo MVC. Now let's save it and look in browser. As you can see here, we are getting the error could not resolve app component CSS. So actually we removed the file, but we didn't remove the reference from app component TS. So here we have style URLs and this file is missing. So we can remove it from here completely because we don't want to write any global CSS. Now when we look in browser, we have hello Todo MVC, so everything is cleaned and we are ready to build our project. Our next step will be to add all global styles that are already prepared for us inside Todo MVC project, because we don't want to write CSS on our own and we need to focus on Angular itself. So for this, we have a global file in source and it is called style CSS. So actually, as you can see here is the message, you can add global styles to this file. And I will paste here all CSS that is prepared in Todo MVC. And as you can see, this is really a lot. So we will use just classes. And you can take the whole file from the description box below. I will have the source code of our project there. Now let's check if it's working. When we're opening a browser, as you can see our h1 is already styled differently, which means the styles are already there. So as you can see here, I can make it bigger and we have CSS for h1, which comes from this file. Our next step is to think about our project structure. Actually, we have quite a small project, but I highly recommend you to always build project and file structure in a scalable way. And this is of course completely possible. So actually in Angular we don't have a super scalable structure. There are some rules and guidelines how we can structure our components, but we can do better. So my idea actually in all project is inside app to just create modules. For example, let's say that we have website with login and feed and something else. So I would create here a module login, module register, probably a module pagination or maybe feed, and then share some things between. So if we are talking about our Todo MVC here, this will be the first module. Of course, our project will consist only from one module. So actually in single module, we can render the whole application because it's not that big. But the idea is that we can use different modules for different pages, like for different features. This is why here I want to create new folder, to-dos, and this will be our new feature or our new module. And here let's create new module and name it to-dos module.ts. And let's jump inside, and if you don't know how to create our new module, we can always open on the right app module and check it. Of course, we won't have everything like here, but it will be similar. So first of all, here we want to export class and we name it to-dos module. And just to remind you, we always want to have this postfix as an entity. So we are here in modules, and actually I named the file not correctly. It is to-dos module. So module is our entity and to-dos is the name. So when we're writing here class, we make here like camel case name with entity and the name. The next thing that we need to do here is of course add our decorator ng module. And as you can see, I have really nice autocomplete of my editor, and if you don't have something like this, you either need another editor, for example something popular like VS Code, or you need to install some plugin for support of TypeScript. And then you have all this nice stuff like type checking, auto imports and so on, and this is super important when you are writing TypeScript or Angular. So as you can see here, I have a nice imports, so here we can define in ng module what we have. For now we don't have anything, so I will just create an empty declarations and an empty imports. And here we will define everything that we need for our module. So our module is ready, but now we should not forget to register it inside app. So the point is that everything is started with app module ts, and this is our main module. But if we won't bind our to-dos module here, it just won't be binded and won't be read by Angular. So what we want to do here, we need here imports, and we want here to write to-dos module. And as you can see here, I also got a nice import. But here is the small problem. As you can see here is always a relative path, and we don't want to use relative path. Why not? Because it is difficult to copy and to understand where this file is located. So we always want to use absolute path. In this case, it will be easier to just copy paste this line to another place, and we don't care where this file is lying. So actually in Angular we have a lot of possibilities to use absolute path, and actually one of them is completely out of the box. So here as you can see we have source folder, and actually because of our tsconfig.json, this source folder is already our absolute path. So what we can say here is source/app, and here we have then to-dos module. And as you can see, I don't get any errors from TypeScript. And if you don't see any errors in TypeScript in your editor, you can always look here in the console. So no errors here, and this is absolute path. So I highly recommend you to always write absolute path, for example like this, starting with source. And here something is not correct, of course, because it's not to-dos, but just app/app. And here we have then source, app, and app routing. So this is much better. Now our to-do module is successfully binded to our app module. And now the question is how we will create and structure our components. What we can do here is simply create an additional folder and name it components. And all our to-dos components will live here. And what I want to do here is create our first component. And let's name it to-dos component. So for this I will create additional folder. So the point is that inside every component we will have several files, and to make our structure really nice and reusable, we want to put everything inside specific folder. This is why component to-dos is our root component for to-dos module. And here I am creating to-dos component.ts and then to-dos component.html. And I'm not creating here CSS just because we have global CSS, which is already imported. Now let's create our first component. So actually here I will just write, for example, h3, and here inside will be to-dos. So just plain simple HTML. Now let's jump in TS file and register here our component. So for this we have our class todos component. And again we have here our name todos, this is the name of component, and here is a postfix, which is our entity. Now here we need a decorator component, and it is of course auto imported, and inside we need to set a selector. So what is selector? This is our todos element. And the point is that normally we will just write here todos, which is actually not the best approach. What we want here to write is app-todos. Why is that? Because we want to have some prefix for all our components. And then, if we want to write something inside our HTML, here we are writing app-todos. And we understand, okay, this is the component of our application. But if we are using some library, normally you will have something like MLA, todos for example, and you understand, okay, this is not my prefix, this is some library. So this is really nice to make your application more understandable. So here we have our component app-todos, so here is prefix, then dash, and then the name of the component. And the second what we need is our template URL, this is our HTML file. So here we're saying todos component HTML. And our basic component is already there. Now we need to register it inside our module. So let's jump back inside our todos module, and here inside declarations we want to write todos component. And as you can see, I always get this relative path because my editor thinks that here absolute path is not needed because it's not that deep inside. But of course I highly recommend you to write source app, and here we have todos components and then the full absolute path. So we successfully added to our declarations our component, and now the question is how we can render it. The main problem is that if we are jumping inside our project, that we have here just hello todos MVC. So normally inside our app component in HTML, we have a router outlet. So we can write here router outlet and close it here. So /router outlet. And this is the place where Angular router will render our page. So if we will go inside app routing module, as you can see, here are our routes. So we don't have any. This is why this is empty array. And we're registering here router modules for root. This is how we normally register global routes inside Angular. So this is app routing module, and we're using it inside app module here. So this is import app routing module, and this is how we register routes. And this is all fine, and normally people would just write here a new route for our todos. For example, on /route, we're rendering this component. And actually it's not the best approach. First of all, it won't work with lazy loading. Secondly, we want to isolate everything and routing also inside our module todos, which means we somehow want here to define all routing that we need and just bind this todos module like we already did. In this case, if we are removing todos module, then our routing will always be automatically removed because this is inside todos folder. So what we want to do here is define new routes. So here is routes, and here we are setting that this is of type routes. And this is important because in this case, we are getting nice, understandable autocomplete. So here, as you can see, I have path, and I am getting directly autocomplete just because here I wrote that this is routes. So our path will be just an empty string because we want to render it in the home page. And here is our component, and here it will be todos component. So as you can see, this is really nice because we are using this todos component only isolated inside our todos module. And now the next step is to use our routes. And for this, inside imports, we can write router module dot, and here will be for child. And this is important part. As you saw here inside app routing module, here we have router module for root. So this is for root, which means this we're only using once inside our app module. And as you can see here, we don't define any routes because we want to define all routes as children inside our other modules. For example, here we're defining route with this component, and here we're using router module for child, and here inside we're passing the array of routes which are belonging to to-dos module. Now let's check if it's working. When we reload the page, as you can see, here is our to-dos and we don't have any errors, so everything is working. The question is how? So first of all, we have here app module and app component. And here we have our router outlet. So normally in this outlet, the page which is inside active route now will be rendered. So here inside app routing, we don't have anything in the routes, but inside app module, we binded our to-dos module. This means that inside to-dos module, we're defining our routes, and this is our route, and inside here for path slash, we will render inside our to-dos component. And our to-dos component, it's just a plain Angular component with selector app to-dos and this content. So as you can see, our first module and first component is already rendered, and it is done in a really scalable way because we are doing it like completely isolated modules and we can scale it indefinitely. Now let's start thinking about what components do we want to create. So here in the example, as you can see on the right, we have at least several of them. So first of all, we have something like header, where inside we have our input, and when we are typing something and hitting enter, then new item appears here. And here is the main part where our list is rendered. We can select here something or remove. And here we have a component with footer, where we have information regarding our tasks and also filters. This is what we want to implement. This is why I highly recommend to create these three components like header, main, and footer. So first of all, let's jump and create inside to-dos components new component header. So here is our header, and let's create inside header component.html and header component.ts. Now inside header component, let's write some basic markup. So what we want here is first of all header with class header. Now let's close our header, and inside we will just have a single input. So here will be input with class, and here will be new to do, and here is our placeholder. So our placeholder is what needs to be done. And actually, if you don't know where to take this HTML, you can always jump in one of the examples, inspect the elements, open DOM elements, and here check all these classes. As you can see, here is our header, then inside we have an input and actually h1 tag also. So here I will close our input and first of all write here h1 with just to-dos inside. Also, we want to add an autofocus for our input, because here when we're just reloading the page, as you can see, I am already in focus for this field. And this is just autofocus with camel case, and we're getting this feature out of the box. So let's check this out. We're reloading the page. As you can see, nothing is there because we didn't bind our header and we didn't create our TS file yet. So first of all, I want to copy paste to-dos component TS because it will look exactly the same. So here I copy pasted inside header our app to-dos, and here I want to name it app to-dos header. So here inside name we have an app, which is the prefix of our application, then we have a name of the module, and then the name of the component. In this case, we always know from what module this component is. And now here the template URL will be header component HTML, and our class is header component. Now we also need to register it inside our module. So let's jump inside to-dos module, and here in declarations we need to add our header component. As you can see, here it is. Again, please write always absolute path. I won't change it everywhere now, but you got my point. So we successfully registered inside declarations our header component, and we need then to render it. So let's jump inside components, to-dos, todos component HTML, and here we don't need this h3 anymore, but we need a markup. So here let's write div class todo app. Let's close our div, and inside first we will have only header, but of course we will create main and footer later. So here we have app to-dos, and here is header, and let's close app to-dos header. And now let's check if it's working at all. As you can see in browser, we're getting here already correct styling. Here is our title, and here is our input. And as you can see out of the box, we're getting autofocus. The only thing that is bothering me is this title that we don't need. So let's jump inside our app, component HTML, and here we don't need h1 tag, but just router outlet. And this is looking exactly like in the example. Now we somehow need to read a value from this input. So when we're typing something, we want when we're hitting enter to get a value. And there are several ways to do this. First of all, we can use ng model, which is two-way data binding, which means we're changing our input and we're changing at this time some property inside our TS file. But I really like to have not two-way data binding, but one way, because it is easier to understand and easier to debug. And for this, we can simply jump back inside our header HTML, and here on our input, we want to add a value. So here we are writing value in square brackets, and here will be some property. In our case, for example, text. And after a value, we also want an event. So here we can write that we have key up event, and here we have a function change text. And we want to pass inside $event. So the idea is that we have single flow of data. So this is the value, and we are just reading this value from this property. And we also have an event key up, and this change text is changing this value. So now let's create this change text function. So here inside our header component, we can create change text, and we're getting here event, and as you can see by default we're getting it as an any because we didn't specify the types. And this is extremely important if you want to write safe code. This is why here I'm saying that we're getting event, and here then inside we're working not with just any, but with event. But here is an important point. Here I can write console log event target value, and actually it will work, but we will get a TypeScript error. When we check in browser, actually it is working, so we can type something and we're getting the value. So we're getting this TypeScript error because we don't have a value inside our target. And as you can see here inside target, we have data type event target. And actually event and event target are really generic classes of the highest hierarchy, which actually means that we need to say here that we're working with input. In other case, TypeScript doesn't know that this is an input. This is why here we can create, for example, target, and we're saying here that we have event.target as, and here HTML input element. So we're explicitly saying that our target is not just event target, but HTML input element. And in this case, inside console log, we can write target.value. And then, as you can see, it is working and we don't have any problems. The next thing is that inside our HTML, we created this value text, but we didn't create it inside our TS file. So let's create here variable text, and we know that this is string, and by default it will be an empty string. So let's reload the page. As you can see here, we don't see anything because it is empty. Now I'm typing something, and as you can see in the console, we are getting the value. So actually every time when we change this input, we are setting here something inside the text. So we need to write here this text equals target.value. And now it is saved, and we can use it also when we are submitting the form. So here we can submit our form only when we are hitting enter. And in Angular there is a really easy solution for that. So we need to jump inside our HTML, and here we want to say keyup.enter. And in this case, our key app will react only for enter. And here we can say add to do, and we don't need to pass anything inside. Now let's create our new function add to do. And here I will write void. And just to remind you, we're using voids everywhere where we're not returning something back. So here we can also say that we're returning back void. And actually, if you have some TypeScript questions, I already made a full course on that here on YouTube, so I will link it here on the top also. So here in add to do now, we can write console log add to do, and here we're just console logging this text. So the idea is that we are changing it here, and then at some point we are submitting our form, and here we want to read this text. So let's check. We're typing something here, and now I'm hitting enter, and as you can see, we're getting in console add to do, and here is our console log. So as you can see, we're getting access to this text, and everything is working correctly. The next question is how we will store our data in the project at all. So if we check in the example, you can see that we don't have that many data. We have an active filter here on the bottom, and we have a list of elements here where we're rendering them. So actually we can do it without service and just store all data in the parent component. But with service it will be easier to make and to scale. This is why I highly recommend, if you are storing some data, always store them inside service and not inside component. So let's create our service for to-dos, which will work fully with everything that we need about to-dos data. So for this, inside app to-dos, we're creating a new folder services, and inside we will create new service to-dos service ts. And actually my recommended naming for all services is when you don't know what the service will do, or this will be just a general service for the module, then we're naming it with the name of our module, so to-dos service ts. Now here we first of all need to say that this service is injectable. This is why we're writing here injectable with round brackets. Round brackets are important and people are normally forget them. And here is our export class to-dos service. And as always, in the name we have a postfix of our entity, and our entity is service. So first of all, here we need to understand in what structure we will store our data. And I highly recommend you to always use observables or behavioral subjects, because Angular is really working nicely with streams, with RxJs. This is why we need to use them fully. This is why here I want to create to-dos, which will be just a behavioral subject. So here I want to say new behavior subject, and here inside we're passing an empty array. So what is the idea of behavior subject? This is just something, some entity, where inside we can set some default value, and here to-dos is a behavior subject, which means we can change it and we can subscribe for it like for observable. So actually it's not some plain data, it is the stream. And with streams is easier to work inside Angular because we can get the data from the stream when we're changing them and modify them easily. But here is the important moment. We didn't define any data type here. So we're just saying that here is empty array and we can throw inside whatever. This is of course bad. And normally we want to create interfaces for all entities inside our application. And actually in our application we have only a single entity, and this is our to-do. So the question is what our to-do needs to have inside. First of all is of course the name, so here is the name of our to-do. Secondly is the state, so is our to-do checked or unchecked. And the third property is of course an ID, because in this case we can easily search for specific to-do in our list. This is why I want to create new interface, and this is interface which is related only for our to-dos module. This is why here we're creating types folder, and inside we will have our to-do interface.ts. So here I want to export interface, and here will be our interface to-do interface. So don't forget postfix interface. And as I said, here we have ID, this is a string. We have here text also string, and we have here, for example, is completed. So actually we can create here some state like a string, for example, active or inactive, but we only have two possible states. This is why here we can say is completed, and here it will be Boolean. So by default it will be false, and then when we're selecting it, it will be true. Now we can provide this interface inside our behavioral subject. So let's jump back into the service, and here in tags we can write to-do interface array. So in this case we are saying that our behavior subject can have inside only an array of to-dos. And as you can see now, it is completely clear what type of data we have inside our to-dos. Now we can everywhere use our to-do service and use this behavioral subject to-dos to store and update our list of to-dos. What we need to do now is create a to-do method so we can add a to-do from every place of our application. So actually the idea is that we are jumping in header component TS, and here we have add to-do. But we don't want to implement adding of to-do inside header component because header component should not know anything about creating the to-do. So what we want to do here is just call our service. And for this we first of all need to inject it, and secondly call it here. So here we need a constructor so we can inject it. And inside constructor we need a private variable, and it will be to-do service that we just created. And here it will be to-do service, so we need to import it here on the top. And now here we can use this to-do, and we don't have any method here, but as you can see we have access to our behavioral subject, which means we can read and update its value. So here what we want to do is just call add to do, we will create it in a second, and we want to pass inside this .text. So this is the only property that we need to provide from our header. Now let's jump back inside our to-do service and create here a public method add to do. So now we know that as an argument we are getting here our text, and it is string, and back we are getting void because we just want to modify our to-dos list. And actually, as you see, it is a behavioral subject, it's not just an array, which means we can't directly just push elements there. So we need to do it a little bit differently. But first of all, I want here to create a new to-do. So what I want to write here is new to-do of type to-do interface. And this is really nice because in this case, we already know what fields we need to provide inside. So here we are getting an error that our object is missing the following properties: ID, text, and is completed. And actually, if I will just remove our to-do interface, then we don't get any help. This is why it is really nice everywhere to specify our interfaces. And our to-do interface is really a shareable entity between the whole application. So here we want first of all text, secondly is completed by default is false, and third is our ID. And actually ID can be tricky, but we can really do easy just by using mathrandom. And I highly recommend you to use mathrandom like this to get an ID. So we can simply say here mathrandom, and this is just a float number, and here we can write toString, this is how it looks like, and then just take first 16 symbols. And this is really nice and easy way to get some stringified ID. This is why here I will write mathrandom toString, and this will be our new to-do. And of course, if we have some backend, normally we just make an API call to the backend, and it delivers for us an ID that is generated on backend side. We don't have here an API, this is why we need to generate IDs on frontend. And actually, if we will use such code several times, then it makes sense to create some global function, something like generate unique ID. So here is our new to-do. Now we need to push them in the list of to-dos. And what we can do for this is create updated to-dos. And this is just a plain array. And here what I want to do is read all values from our to-dos. So for this we can write this to-dos get value, and this will return plain data from our behavioral subject. In our case, it will be the array of to-dos. And as you can see here, I used spread because we want to merge all these values from the array with our new to-do, and our new to-do is going to the end. And this is how we update our to-dos. And as you can see here, we directly get that we're getting back to-do interface array, because we're merging value from to-dos and our new to-do. Now we just need to update our behavioral subject, and for this we have a function next, and inside we're providing a new value. And our new value is our update to-dos. So this is exactly the code what we need to add a to-do to our list of to-dos. Now let's check if this code is doing something. So I want to jump back to our header component and inside constructor subscribe to this to-do service, and here is to-dos. And actually behavioral subject can work as an observable, which means we can subscribe for its value. This is why here I am writing subscribe, and here we're getting our to-dos, and I just want to console log here our to-dos. In this case, every time when we change our stream, we will get here a value. And as you can see here, we're getting directly back to-do interface array. This is exactly what we want. So here we subscribed to changes to our stream of to-dos. So let's reload the page and see if it's working. So obviously not, we have some errors. As you can see, we didn't provide our to-do service inside our module. So we need to register our to-do service inside our to-dos module. So for this I will jump in to-dos module TS, and here we need to create new property which is called providers, and we must provide our to-do service inside this array of providers. Now when we reload the page, as you can see, we don't have any errors, and as you can see in the console, we already got our first console log. And this is our stream from header, and as you can see by default we don't have any to-dos. Now I'm creating new to-do, and as you can see after I'm hitting enter, we directly got an update in our stream. And as you can see here, we have our first element, here we have our unique ID, is completed false, and our text. So this means that everything is working and our add to do function is implemented correctly. So now we can just with single line like this everywhere in our application use to do service to add a to do. And what is really important, our header doesn't know anything about implementation of to do service or add to do. We simply call here add to do and this is it. So let's remove console log, and we don't need this subscription because it was just for testing. And actually, as you can see here, our header is completely ready. So on reload we have here focus, then when we type something, we are updating our array. The only problem that I can see here that we don't remove the value from input after we're hitting enter. And we can easily fix it just by jumping in our add to do, and after we successfully edit the element, we want to reset this text. So here we can assign inside empty string. Now let's reload the page, type something, and when I'm hitting enter, as you can see our input is empty. The next step is to render all our elements. And as I already said, we need to create additional component for this. This is main component, where inside we will render our entries. So for this, let's jump in our components. So here we have only header and to-dos. And actually to-dos is just a parent for everything. So inside after header, we want to write app to-dos, and here will be not header, but for example main. And now we must create this new component here. So I will create main folder, and inside main component.ts and main component.html. Now let's just write inside main in HTML and create our first component. So we need here component, and here inside we want to provide our selector. So our selector is app to-dos main. And now we have template URL, and this will be main component HTML. And here is our class, of course, with export. So here is main component, and our component is actually ready. Now we just need to add it inside our module. So I am jumping to to-dos module, and here inside declarations, we must write main component. And as you can see, I got, as always, auto import on the top. So now, when I reload the page, as you can see, we don't have any errors, but we don't see our main. It may happen that Angular didn't get that we created new component. It can happen really often. This is why the easiest way is just to restart web server if you don't know if you made an error or not. In this case, you can be sure that it's not the problem of Angular. And as you can see here, we successfully got our rendered component, which means actually it was not a bug, but Angular just can't get somehow the changes that we did to the files, especially when we create a bunch of new components. So as you can see, our main is there and we can render some content inside. For this, let's jump back inside main component TS and think about our data. And for this, we need to look in the example. And actually, the point is that Angular together with RxJs gives us a nice and strong opportunity how we're writing the code with streams. But the main problem is that it is not easy, and in other frameworks we're writing it differently. This is why it is really difficult to adjust how we're writing code together with Angular and NGRX. So let's think about our application here. What do we want to show here inside main section? As you can see here, we're rendering elements and they are depending on the active filter. So actually we can say that we save, for example, filter inside our service like a value. So when we're clicking active, our filter value is active inside service, but then we somehow need to filter all our data with this filter. So normally what people are doing, they are subscribing to our to-dos, for example, something like to-dos, subscribe, and then we're getting here to-dos, and we have them like local variable, and then we think about some usage with other properties. For example, here we want to filter our to-dos, then we're writing to-dos filter, and we're filtering them by this active filter. And of course, this is completely possible, and this is how people are writing in other frameworks. But it doesn't make any sense to write code like this inside Angular because we have RxJs, and it is much easier to work with streams. This is why we want to really make it correctly and build even this small to-do application using streams. So what do we need to do? First of all, as I already said, we need to store somewhere active filter. So this filter on the bottom, by default it is all, and then when we're hitting here a button, we change our filter. So I really want to jump back in our service here and create a new behavior subject. And again, as you see, I am operating with RxJS streams. I am not operating with values because RxJS is really super powerful with streams. So what we want here is filter, and it will be behavior subject. And here what we want to do is create an enum. And actually, yes, we can simply store here a string like all, active or completed, but we have in TypeScript enums, and this is really a nice place for an enum. So what I want to do here is write filter enum, and here is the type of possible values, and here is the default value, and filter enum dot, for example, all will be our default value. Now let's create this enum. I highly recommend you to store all enums together with types. So what I want to do here is create filter enum.ts inside todos/types. And here we can create new enum and name it filter enum. And here is the object with 3 possible values. This is all, active, and completed. So we're just storing here 3 strings, but this is really nice because we have a data type as a filter enum and all these values. This is why active is active, and of course completed is completed. So as you can see, this is just a plain TypeScript enum, and inside we have 3 strings. But now when we are jumping in our service and importing here our filter enum, as you can see, first of all, we're using filter enum as data type. This is why we can't really provide a wrong value inside our filter, because we said only this enum is valid. And now here is the default value, filter enum all, and as you can see, this is just a string all. So here is our filter and how we're storing it. The point is that in our main component, we want to get only visible to-dos. So they are visible depending on the list of our to-dos and the active filter. And we can really easily do it with RxJs because we have two streams. So what we want to do is use these two streams inside our main component. This is why here inside main component I want to create, for example, observable, visible to-dos. And this will be a stream of observable. And here inside we will have an array of to-dos. This is why it will be to-do interface, and by default it doesn't have any value, because this is an observable and we will assign it directly in our constructor. The most important part that we always specify that here we have a data type to-do interface array. So now we can create our constructor, and inside we need our to-do service. So here is our to-do service, and here is to-dos service. Actually not to-do but to-dos with S. And now inside our constructor we can combine two streams. So here we have access inside this to-do service to to-dos stream, actually behavioral subject, but this is for us here also a stream, and filter is a stream. So we want to combine these two values, and depending on the values that we are getting from them, we can calculate something. In this case, we can use here this visible to-dos, this is our result, and here we can use combine latest. And if you don't know what combine latest from RxJs is doing, it combines streams. In our case, we can combine two streams, this to-do service, and here will be our to-dos, and this to-do service filter. So here we are combining two streams, and we are getting some value back. And of course, we don't want just to get two streams back, we want here to get back an array of to-dos as an observable. This is why here I am writing pipe, and inside it will be map. And if you are asking why we have here pipe, because this is an architecture of RxJs. So the idea is that pipe is simply a list of functions that we want to call on our stream. So actually combine latest gives us a combination of stream, and then we want to call several functions on it, and the first function here will be map. This is why we always write after .pipe and we are doing something inside. So here inside map we directly get two values inside an array. First of all the array of our to-dos, and secondly is a filter. And if we open the documentation, as you can see combine latest, here is the most important line. When any observable emits a value, emit the last emitted value from each. Which means when, for example, we are getting new to-do, we are getting here inside map, and we are getting these to-dos with a new to-do and our active filter. So here inside map, we have a result which is an array. This is why here I will destructure it directly to get to-dos and our filter. And we need to specify here that we are getting back to-do interface. This is an array, and here we have our filter. This is our filter. Enum. And now we should not miss our brackets. This is why inside here, inside map, I want to have some logic. But first of all here I want to console log. First of all it will be combine, so we can see that this is our combine, and inside we have our to-dos and filter. And after all our calculations that we will get in a second, we want to return our visible to-dos. And I will simply return here empty array, so it won't break. As you can see, this code already works, because of course we didn't do some calculations, but we returned here an array. This is why here visible to-dos is valid. This is an array which is just empty. But now you probably are thinking this code is not looking really easy, and it is quite complex, and we're writing a lot of brackets and so on. Yes, but this is a way how you must work with Angular, only by using RxJs. And here are several benefits why this is good. First of all, we don't write here subscribe. And as you can see, because we don't write here subscribe, we have only this value, and we will use it directly inside our HTML just by using async. So here inside our HTML, we can write now, for example, brackets, then we have our visible to-dos, and we're writing async, and this is all. We don't need any subscribe, and Angular will do everything for us. And here I want also to write a JSON, because we're getting back an array. Secondly, here we will get changes every time when something will happen. For example, when our to-dos changes or our filter change, then we're getting here directly new value, because here we have some calculation. If you will try to write it not in a RxJs way, you need really to have here to subscribe and then somehow synchronize and calculate your value when some of this value is changing. This is really consuming and not productive and not Angular way. So let's check if it's working at all. So we're reloading the page and everything is broken. As you can see, the pipe JSON can't be found. This is happening because we must provide inside our to-dos module common module from Angular. As you can see, we didn't provide it here in imports, and actually we need to inject it every time when we're creating new module. So here inside imports, we need common module, and this is from Angular, and I just import it. So as you can see, this is from Angular common. And a lot of stuff like router stuff or this ngIfs and so on, it all will work, or this pipe also, just because of this module. Now, as you can see in browser, we don't have any errors, and here is our array that we're getting directly inside our HTML. So as you can see, when we have a stream, we can directly write it like this with async, and here of course I'm using JSON just so we have a pretty JSON inside our HTML, but the main point is that we don't need any subscribers, unsubscribers and so on, because we simply have here an observable. Also, when I'm typing something here in our header and I'm hitting enter, as you can see, we're getting directly inside combine, and here you can see our new element. And this is exactly what we wanted. We wanted to react on the changes in our two streams from our service and somehow get a new value. So this is exactly the main difference from other frameworks in Angular. We're using heavily streams from RxJs, and we're not just subscribing to these streams, but we directly combine them or change them or map them inside our components to get new values. And we will use this logic a lot just because Angular for us unsubscribes the streams when we're using async pipe. Now we just need to write here our logic with to-dos and filter. So first of all, here we have an if our filter equals, and here will be our filter enum dot, for example, active. So we want here to return only active to-dos, which means is completed should be false there. This is why here I directly return our to-dos, and here I am using filter. And we want to filter inside all elements where is completed is false. This is why I am putting here bang. And this code will directly inside visible to-dos write filtered elements. The next logic is here if else our filter equals completed. This is why filter enum dot completed. And here we want exactly the same logic, so I'm copying this filter, but without bang. So here to do is completed. So here we're getting only completed to-dos. And if these two cases are not there, so they are false, we want to directly return all our to-dos. So we just write here return to-dos. Let's reload the page and check if it's working. So by default, this is an empty array. Actually, this is in our HTML. And now I'm typing something and hitting enter. As you can see, directly here inside our HTML, we have access to our to-do, because we are here in this return, because our filter by default is all. It's not active and it's not completed. And as you can see, directly when I just type something and add an item in our service, we react through our combined stream. This stream is changed, then we're calculating this value and we're rendering it directly with single line inside HTML. And this is exactly how we want to write our code inside Angular. Now let's write a markup for our visible to-dos. So let's jump in HTML, remove everything, and create here UL with class, and here will be to-do list. So inside this UL, we want to render the list of our to-dos. So here we need to close our UL, and inside render the list. So here we will have Lee, and probably later we must move all this content to additional component because we have quite a lot of logic here. First of all, here we can check or uncheck the element. We have remove, but also we have inline editing. So when I'm double clicking here, as you can see, we have inline input and we can change the value. So it is quite a lot of logic and I don't want to write it directly inside our main component. But for now, just to see the list, we can render just a bunch of Lee instead. This is why here we have Lee, and here we need an ng for loop, and we want to loop through our observable. This is why here we will have let to do off, and here will be visible to do's async. Now inside we can just render our todo.text. And let's check what we have. So here in browser, as you can see, we don't have anything. Now I am just creating a new element and here it is. So all our new elements are directly rendered inside our main content. Now, as I already said, I want to create new element, for example, component to do, and move all logic with rendering there. This is why here I want to create new component and let's call it to do. And inside we need to do component HTML. And here will be to do component TS. And the question is how we will name it. First of all, I don't want to write it directly like I did before. This is why I will copy all declarations from our to-dos component, just to avoid typing. And here we have not to-dos component but to-do. The template URL is to-do component HTML, and the name will be then app, then to-dos. This is the name of our module, and the component is to-do. Now we need to bind our component inside module. So here inside declarations, we need to add our to-do component. Actually not to-dos, but to-do component. Now we have the correct import, as you can see here. The next question is what we will pass inside. So inside our components main, here we have Lee. Actually, we don't need here Lee anymore, but we can render here app. Here we have to-dos and here to-do element. And let's close it here. So it is app, to-dos, dash to-do. And now inside we don't need to render something like this because we will render all markup inside our element. And this is why inside here we can remove everything, but we want to pass some data. And in our case, we want to pass our to-do. So here we are looping through the list of to-dos, and here inside every element, we will pass as an input the whole to-do. In this case, we have the whole information, and our to-do is actually stateless, and we will simply render the to-do or emit some events for outside. Now we need to define this to-do's input. So we need to jump in our to-do component TS, and here we are saying that we have an input. If you don't know, input is the way to pass some data to our children. In our case, we want to pass our to-do. But here is the interesting thing that not a lot of people are doing. We can use here aliases. So normally people are writing something like this, input to-do, and we have local property this to-do. The main point is here that then all our properties, which are local, are just this.foo or this.bar, but also our input is this.todo. And in this case, we don't see any difference between our input and any local properties. And this is not what I want, because for me, it is easier to work with inputs like, for example, in props, if you know something about React. The main idea is that props are read-only in React, Vue, and obviously in Angular it will also make sense to treat them like read-only properties. This is why actually I want to mark them with to-do props. So here I can write something like this, and I'm saying here that this is to-do interface. So what is happening? Here we define that we have an input to do. which means outside we're using it like to do, but inside we have local alias to do props. So there is no such property like this dot to do, but instead this dot to do props. And when I see such local variable, I know that this is coming from the input and I will never mutate it. Now let's render our to-do inside. So for this, inside HTML, we can simply create, for example, li element. And inside this li, we want to render not to do but to do props, dot, and here will be text. And in this case, we directly see, okay, this is coming from the input. Now let's reload the page and check if it's working. So I'm typing something, and now we're rendering this information, but not inside main, but inside our to-do component, which means we created additional component, and in this component through our input, we're passing each to-do. Now let's finish our main component. So actually when we check in the example here, you can see that we have this element on the left, which is actually toggle all. But the point is, when we inspect this element here, actually it is situated inside main. So you can see here is main part, and we have this toggle all with top and left. Actually, because of this top, it looks like this element is inside header, but actually it is inside main, which means we need to implement the same logic inside our main with toggle all. And also when we don't have any elements here, so we will remove everything. As you can see, we don't see main and we don't see footer, which means we need to create additional class to hide our content. So let's jump back in our main, and here we want to add one more element. So what I want here to do is create section with class main, and let's close this section at the end. So what we want now to do with this section is to add here ng class. And the interesting part is that in ng class, we want to apply class hidden. Here I will write just false for now, but later we will change this to variable. So the idea is that hidden should be true when we don't have something to render, which means if we don't have any visible to-dos, this means that hidden should be true. Which means we must create this property, and actually RxStreams can help us with this. So let's jump directly inside our main component, and we want in our constructor to create one more property. And actually here we can create it and name noToDo class. And here is the observable of boolean, which means we're getting here true or false. And depending if it is true or false, we're attaching here this hidden class. So what I want to do here inside our constructor is to write this noToDo class equals, and here we need to use this to do service, and here we will have our to-dos. So what we want to check, we want back from these to-dos to get either false or true. And it is true when we have to-dos, and it is false when we don't have to-dos. So for this we can use here pipe and map like we already did previously, and inside map we're getting back our to-dos, and what we want here is to check to-dos length equals 0. Why is equals 0? Because here is no to-dos class, which means we want to get this class in true only when we don't have any to-dos. And this is exactly what we have. So we created new observable, and we're watching on our stream to-dos, and here we have pipe with map, and actually map transforms our stream. And here we have access to all our to-dos that we have, and inside we can check, okay, we're returning here our no-to-dos class when to-dos length equals 0. Which means here we want to write inside HTML instead of false now, no-to-dos class, and here is a thing. And let's check how it looks like. So we're reloading the page, we don't have any errors, and as you can see here, our main is not rendered. Now we're typing something, and here is our main. And let's check now in inspector our element. As you can see here, we have our main, and then to-do list. So actually here is to-do list, and here is main section, this is this. Now the point is when I reload the page, as you can see here is our main hidden, which means this container is hidden because our no-to-dos class was resolved and this is true. This is why we attached here hidden class. As you can see, with using RxJs, our HTML is really easy and our code in TS are just a bunch of streams. The next point that we want to implement is this toggler on the left. And actually this is an input with the label and we need to render them inside our section. So here we have an input and here we have ID, toggle all. And here also will be class, toggle all. And type will be checkbox. Now after this we want to just close it and we also have a label. So here will be label for toggle all. And this is exactly why we have here ID, so this label will focus the ID, and here we want to close our label, and here we want to write inside mark all as completed. And this is it, so we have a label and an input. Let's reload the page and check if it's working. So we're typing something, we see here our element, here on the left, just because our main section was rendered. The next point is that we want to highlight it as checked when all our to-dos are checked. So here in the example you can see when we're clicking, this is checked, so this is gray, because all our items are completed. And we want exactly the same approach, and we of course want to use streams here. So we have an input and here is type checkbox, and we want here to attach checked. So it should be checked when our stream will be resolved. And here I want to create new stream and name it, for example, is all to-dos selected. And here is of course dollar because this is a stream, and here I'm writing async. So exactly like previously, we will create new observable and we will resolve it here. So actually this input will be checked when all our to-dos have status is completed. Now I will just copy it and create in our TS file new observable. So we know that this is observable of Boolean because here we have is, which means this is a Boolean. Now here inside our constructor, we can create this is all to-dos selected. And exactly like previously, we can use here this to-do service to-dos because we want to access our to-dos. And the point is that here we want to check that every element inside our array has this property is completed inside true. This is why here I am using pipe map again, and here inside map I am getting access to to-dos. And here we can use plain JavaScript and just write to-dos every, and here inside every we are getting access to each element, so this is to do. And here we can say to do dot is completed. What does this code do? So here we have a stream for to-dos, and here we have a map, so we transform our stream to some other property. And as you can see here we have access to our to-dos, which is an array. Now what we're returning here is this construction. So what we're doing here, we're using to-dos every, and every accepts a function with a predicate, which means here we will get back true if every element of this array returns true. So here we're checking for every element, and this is to-do, that to-do is completed is true, which means if every element has property is completed in true, then this stream is all to-do selected will be true. So let's check if it's working. So here, when I will type something, as you can see, this is gray, and we don't have any possibility to mark it as completed. But here is the solution just to test that our code is working. We can jump back in our service here, and here we have this new to-do, and we are creating new to-do with is completed false. We can change it to the true, and then by default, this element should be grayed out. This is why here I am reloading the page, I am typing something, and as you can see now it is not grayish, but this is more about black. So we can inspect this element, and as you can see here we have this checkbox, and this is checked. So everything is working as we expected. Now what we want to do is implement clicking on this element. As you can see, actually checking and unchecking is working just because this is plain HTML. But this is not enough for us. Here we want to actually change the status. This is why here on our input we can add new event, and this is change event, and here toggle all to-dos, and inside we are passing our $event. So here we need to create a new function, toggle all to-dos, which will mark all to-dos as is selected or is selected false. So let's create this function now inside main. For example, here after our constructor, we will create toggle all to-dos, and inside we are getting our event. This is why here is event of type event, and here we are returning void. So what we want to do here is to get our target, because we want to read event.target.checked, and we can't do it because actually target should be HTML input element. So here I will create our target of event.target and say that this is HTML input element. Now here we can use this target.checked. And what we want to do, we want to pass this information inside our service, because only our service is working with our data. This is why here I am writing this to-do service, and we need to create a new function, for example, toggle all, and here we are passing target.checked. So we are passing here either that our checkbox is checked or not checked. And here we are calling toggle all function. Now let's create in our service this toggle all function. So here we know that toggle all accepts only one argument. So it will be is completed. So actually is completed is a boolean, and it either true or false. And here we have also void because we don't want to return anything. Now what we want to do is loop through all our to-dos and change them all either on false or on true. For this, we can use a simple map. So here we can create a property updated to-dos, and here we want to loop through these to-dos, and here will be get value, so we're getting just plain array. And I want to map through every element, and here I'm getting access to the to-do. Now inside I want to return the same to-do, but override is completed property. This is why here will be return, and here we can spread our to-do, so we're just getting all properties from this object, and we are overwriting is completed fully. So this is completed, this is what we are getting from our function. So let's also console log it here, so we can check that this is correct. And here, as you can see, this is our updated to-dos. I won't write them directly in these to-dos, so let's check first if it is working at all. So here is our updated to-dos, and it should just loop through our these to-dos and update each value with is completed that we passed here. So let's reload the page, check that we have any errors. We don't. So now I will just create new element here, and of course by default it is also toggled. We don't want this. This is why by default here I will change is completed to false. Now let's reload the page again, and here I'm creating something. This is gray. Now I'm clicking here, and this is what we have. So is completed is true because our input is checked. You can see this here. And now this is the list of updated to-dos. As you can see, we have only single element, and here is completed is true. But actually by default our new to-do was false, and because here we mapped through and set is completed to true, this is true. So our updated to-dos is there, and we just need to override it in these to-dos. And here we just make a next, and we are passing here our updated to-dos list. In this case, we are just updating to-dos, and then inside our main, here we have our stream for is all to-dos selected, and here these to-dos will be changed, and then we recalculate our property again. This is why we are reloading the page. We are just typing something, and as you can see, this is gray here. Now I'm clicking here, and this is not gray anymore, because actually we changed all our to-dos to is completed. But we actually can't really see it. This is why we can jump directly inside single to-do, and here add, for example, a span. And inside this span, I just want to see for debugging to-do props dot is completed. Let's reload the page, and here I am typing something. You can see that this element is false. Now I am clicking here and this element is true. I'm clicking again and this is false, which means everything is correct and our function really changes all our to-dos to false or true. Now, before we will continue to implement a single to-do, I want to implement footer component. So let's check this out. Here is our example, this is our footer. So here we have 0 items left, so this item is changing depending on the items that we have in progress. Also here we have 3 filters, all active and completed, and we can switch between them, and the only thing that we are changing is active filter and of course the list of items. So here all shows all items, then active only active and completed only completed. So now let's implement our footer component. For this I will jump in to-dos components and create here a new folder, footer, and inside footer component.ts and footer component.html. And now inside let's just write footer so we can check if it's working. And here is our footer component. I don't want to write it. This is why I will copy paste it, for example, from header. So actually I want to copy this class and component, so I won't write it again. So first of all, we need to auto import our component, and this will be app to-dos footer. Now here we need template URL footer, and the name of our class will be footer component. So our component is ready, but we need to register it inside our module. So let's jump inside to-dos module, and here inside declarations, I will add footer component. And let's save this out, and actually it should work. Let's check. Actually here nothing is rendered because we forgot to render footer inside our layout. So actually here we can jump in components to-dos in our layout for to-dos, and here I will copy our main and write here app to-dos, and here we will have footer. And now I need to close our footer component. So as you can see now on the bottom we have this footer part, and actually between we have this main and then footer. So actually we have footer always, and we also need to write some logic to hide it. Now let's start with hiding this footer. So for this let's jump in our footer, and here we want, instead of this word, write footer, and here will be our class footer, and here we want ng class like we did already in main. So here we want a new class, and this class will be hidden, and we want to attach it if we have no to-dos class async. And actually we already implemented this part inside main, so we can copy paste it. Obviously we can move it, for example, in service, but I don't see really that this is that shareable. Now here let's close our footer and write inside, for example, footer. So now here we need in our TS to implement this property, and I don't want to type a lot, this is why I am jumping inside main, and here we want to copy paste this no-to-do class. And for this we need to create here constructor, and we want to inject here private to-do service, this is our service, of to-do service. Let's close this now, and inside I will paste these lines that I copied. But first of all, here is to-dos service and not to-do. Secondly, we need to create this property. So no to-dos class, and actually the naming was not correct there. It should be no to-dos class, but it doesn't make any difference because this is just a local variable. So this is an observable of Boolean. Here is our property, and now it's not red anymore, but we also need to import map. As you can see, now we don't have any errors. So let's check if it's working. So we created this property, this is our observable for to-dos, and here we are checking that our to-dos length equals 0. And we are using this property here to add hidden class when this observable isn't true. So let's reload the page. As you can see, we always see footer, and this is not correct. Actually, here in console, I can see that there is an error and we didn't name our property correctly. So as you can see here, TypeScript says that the property is noToDo's class, not noToDo class. This is why here in our HTML, we need to rename this property and then it should be compiled. Now, as you can see, we don't get any errors, and let's reload the page and open our console. So there are no errors in the console and we don't see our footer. Now we're typing something and adding an item, and here now we're seeing our footer. So our logic is working, and now we can create inside footer on the left this counter here. So we have one item left. So actually, first of all, we have here item and items. So this is singular and plural. And here, of course, a counter. So what I want to do, I want to create two new observables, one for the string, and secondly for a counter. So this is why I will jump in TS file and create here two new observables. First of all, here I want this active count, and this will be the count of our active to-dos. So here we can use for this to-do service, and here as always we have to-dos, then pipe, and here we want to map our value. And inside value we are getting to-dos, and we want to get here only to-dos that are active. And we already wrote this code inside our combine latest in RxJs. So here will be to-dos, then filter, and here we have access for each to-do, and we are checking that to-do is completed, is false. And after this we can simply say length. So the idea is here that this will be the result, so we're filtering our array with is completed false, and then we're just using .length. And we're passing this inside our this active count. So we need to create now this observable, and it will be observable of type number, because here inside we're using length. And the second thing that we need is our label. As you can see, this label here can be singular or plural. And actually we can also create an observable and store our label there. For this we can say this, and here for example items left, text. So here we have a text regarding how many items we have left. What we want to do here is to use our observable this active count. And actually it doesn't mean that we always need to use only this to-do service. We created here a new observable and we can map it also. So for this I will write here this active count, and we know that this is the length, so this is the number. And here I want to use pipe and map inside our number. So actually here we have active count and we know that this is a number. So here we can write a string that we are getting back. So here will be item, because it is singular. Then we have here logic, so active count not equal 1, because it must be more than one item. Then we have an s here. Then here we can write a ternary operator with s or empty string, and here at the end space left. And yes, I understand that writing a ternary operator inside a string is considered a bad practice, but here we have only a single line, and I can't say that this is really that not readable. But of course you can create here several lines and move this ternary operator logic to some additional property. So here we created our items left text, and we need to register our property. So here it will be observable of string. So we successfully created two observables, and we can just render them inside our HTML. So let's jump inside footer component HTML, remove here footer word, and write some markup. So here we will have to-do count. This is our container. So now inside we want first to render an active count. So here will be strong, because it should be bold, and we don't have a class for this. So here I'm closing strong, and inside I have this active count with $, and of course async, because this is an observable. And after this we want to render our text. So here we have items left text, and here is async. Let's save this and check if it's working. So we're reloading the page, we don't see footer. Now we're adding something, and here we see one item left. Now we create one more item and we see here 2 items left. As you can see, RxJs is really super powerful. We can create new properties based on some logic or some streams, and everything is updated automatically, and we don't need to write some subscribers or additional logic. The next thing that we need to build is our filters. So as you can see here in the example, we have active, all, and completed. So we can just render them inside markup. And of course we can render them, for example, as an array with loop, but I don't want to make it too complex. This is why I will simply render 3 elements. So let's jump here inside our markup, and after our span, we can create UL with class filters. And here will be our filters that we can take from enum, because we already created an enum. So what we want here is our li, and inside li we will have an a. So here a, href, and here everywhere I will just use a slash, because we want to make prevent default and then just handle a click event on this a href. And you might ask why then I'm using here a href and not some span or div element, because all styling is already prepared for a. So here we have our href, and now we need ng class, and here we will have class that this is selected. As you can see here, we have highlighted element when our filter is active. For example, in this case, completed is active. And this is exactly the point here. We want to attach selected, and here I will just write for now true, because we don't have any logic or any property to check that this filter is selected. So after ng class, here I need to close our a. After ng class, we have also click event. So here on click, we want to call some function. So we want to call, for example, change filter. And inside we will pass 2 things. First of all is event, and secondly, we want to pass here filter enum.all. And at this point you might ask, okay, why we are passing here this event? Because actually we are just saying here filter enum all, and this is the value from our filter enum, and this is enough for us. Yes, you're completely right, but the point is that we want to make event prevent default. This is why we are passing here this event. Now inside a, we can just render text all. Now let's save this, and actually this is a markup for our 3 filters. So I will copy twice this li and just change it. So here is our second li. I will leave it like this, but here will be filter enum, and first of all we have here active, and here the text will be also active. And the last one here will be not all, but completed, and here filter enum.completed. But here is an important part. As you can see here, I wrote filter enum with small f. And first of all, we can't really put our enums or import them inside our HTML. We can do it only inside TS, so here on the top, but the problem is that then they are available only as local property and not in the template. This is why here I want to create filter enum as a local property, and this property will be public for our template. And here I want to assign our filter enum. And actually this filter enum I will import on the top. So this is how we are bringing our enums inside templates. And of course we don't want to write here just strings, because we want to use an enum. Now let's check if it's working. So here I'm reloading the page, I'm typing something, and you can see our footer and our filters. And we're highlighting all our filters as active because we wrote everywhere selected true. And also when we're clicking, we have a red message because we didn't create change filter function. So first of all, let's create this function here somewhere on the bottom. It will be change filter, and we know that we're getting here event of type event, and the second will be our filter enum. And here we're returning void. So let's at least console log here our change filter, and here we have our filter enum. Actually, I didn't put here a value, so let's name it filter. So here we have our filter, and let's check if it's working. So we're typing something here inside footer. I am clicking on active, and as you can see, we have full page reload. This is because I wrote here a href, and we need first of all to write here event prevent default. In this case, we will block the default behavior of A. So here we have our footer. I am clicking on active, and here is our console log change filter active. So this is exactly what we wanted. The next point is that here we are highlighting all our filters at once, and of course it's not correct. So what we want to do here is to write some logic. And this logic actually should be based on the filter observable. So just to remind you, here inside our service, so Todo's service, we have on the top filter behavioral subject. And this is where we're storing our filter. So now we can use this property inside our template. So what I want to do is jump back inside footer component TS, and here inside constructor, I can create new property, for example, this dot filter. And actually this will be an observable, and here we will write this to the service dot filter. And you might say why I am doing like this and not just using service directly in the template. Sure, you can do this if you will make it public, but this is a bad approach because we want to isolate all services and just use them inside TypeScript. And then inside HTML, we're using only things from our TypeScript file. This is why I'm creating here filter observable, and we can create it here on the top, and we know that this is observable of filter enum. So now this filter is available for us directly inside our HTML. So here we can write instead of true some logic. For example, here filter $async, and here I want to write equals, and here we have our filter enum.completed. And actually this code is not valid because this construction won't be parsed correctly. So first of all, we want to execute this async and then comparison. This is why we need to write here round brackets. In this case, it will work correctly. Now I will copy paste this line and paste it here and here. And we just need to change our filter enum to all, and here filter enum dot active. So now we are subscribing to our observable from service because this is just a reference, and we are comparing it with our filter enum. Now let's check if it's working. So here I am in browser. Let's make it smaller. I'm typing something, and as you can see, only all is active, because by default our filter is all. And obviously when we will change our filter, it will be automatically changed, because this is just a stream and we're subscribing on our stream. This is why what we need to do now is activate our filter change. So as you can see here, we have our change filter, but we didn't do anything. So we need some function inside service that will change our filter. But of course we can write something like this dot to do service. Here we have access to the filter and we can use here next. But this is of course bad approach, because actually we want to create some public method that can change our filter and not just change our behavioral subject directly. In the real application, I would make this filter behavioral subject and to-do's behavioral subject private and just allow them through some getter to make it more safe. So this code is bad, and what we want here is something like this to do service, and here we want to create new function change filter, and inside we are passing our filter, or actually maybe filter name is a better naming. So here will be our filter name. We don't need console log, but now we need to create this change filter function inside our service. Let's jump to our service. So to do service, and here on the bottom, I want to create new function change filter. And here we're getting our filter name, which is our filter enum. And here, of course, we're returning void. So what I want to do here is just change our filter behavioral subject. So for this, we're writing here next filter name. So yes, this is exactly the same code that we can write outside, but the point is that we are wrapping it in some public method change filter. So let's save this and check if it's working. So I'm typing here something, and you can see that all is active. Now I'm clicking on Active tab, and as you can see, our filter here is changed. Now we're clicking on Completed, and our filter is changed. And did you saw that? We don't see any items now, because we don't have any completed items. So actually our code is working completely correctly. We filter all these items based on the filter and our to-dos. So if we will jump in our main here, where we wrote it, in the main component, TS, here we have this visible to-dos combine latest. And this is exactly why we did that. So here we have two streams, to-dos and filter. And we just changed our filter stream. This is why all this logic was recalculated. This is why here when we are on all, we're seeing our element because this is still active. Now we're jumping to completed, our filter was changed and we don't have any elements to render. So we successfully implemented our footer part, and as you can see in our component, we just have a bunch of observables from some streams from our service, and we're just mapping them to the values that we need. And then our HTML is super clean, because here we're just having observables with a sync. Now, the only component that we didn't implement is our to-do component. So our header is ready, footer is ready, and now we need to render correct information. But this is not that easy because here we have a lot of states. First of all, here in all, you can see by default this markup. We have here, first of all, is completed, and then our styles is changing. Then on the right, we have on hover this cross, so we can remove the item, and also we can double click, and this activates edit mode. So we can type something and hit enter, and then it will be automatically saved inside our service. So let's implement exactly this. First of all, I want to start with markup. So let's jump inside our to-dos components, and here is our to-do component. So we have here just Lee and span, and this is not enough. So here I want to remove span because it was only for debugging. Now inside Lee we need to render div with class view. So let's close this div, and this will be the container of our element. So first of all, here we have an input, and this is this checkbox on the left. So here is input with class toggle, and here is type checkbox. Now after input, we need to add here a label, also without any events. And here inside the label, I want to write our to-do props. And just to remind you, we have here not to-do name, but to-do props, because this is our input, and here dot text. And after this, we need a button to remove our to-do on the right. So here is button class destroy. And here we're closing our button. And inside we will add an event. And actually here we don't need to write anything inside the button, because this destroy class will add this icon. Now let's check if it's working at all. So we're reloading the page, and we're typing something, and here how it looks like. Actually not bad. We have here text, we have our icon on hover, and we have an input on the left. The next thing that I want to do is implementing this double click and edit mode. So first of all, here we want to add double click for our text. This is why here on the label we can attach a double click. Now here on double click, what we want to do is set to do in edit mode. And as you can see, my names are sometimes really verbose, but this is intended, because I really want to give a best possible understanding from the name. And here set to do in edit mode is really clear. It's not something like activate edit, which is actually not bad, but for example, set edit is not that understandable. So here is our set to do in edit mode, and here let's at least create this method, and here we don't get anything, this is void, and I want to console log here set to do in edit mode. So let's check if it's working. I'm typing something, I'm double clicking, and you can see in the console this console log. The next question is how our editing will work at all. So actually when we check the example, here we're double clicking and the first item is edited. Now we're clicking on the second and actually as you can see the first item is not edited anymore, which actually means somewhere we need to store the active edited ID. So this is enough for us because we know, okay, we're editing now the element with ID 1, for example. Then we're double clicking here. Okay, we're editing the item with ID 2. The main point is that we have two ways how we can implement this. First of all, of course, we can create inside our service, here somewhere on the top, new property and store there our editing ID. This is totally fine and this is really reusable. But I want to show you that we don't always need service and sometimes it's completely fine to just store our value inside parent. So my idea is that instead of service, we can store our value inside main here. And you might ask why here, because this is our parent, which means it is only rendered once. Actually, we can't really store the editing value here inside element, because then we can activate editing in several elements, because they are all not synchronized. When we have a single value here in main, we can pass it directly inside a child. And this is exactly what I want to do. So here inside main component we can create just a plain variable editing ID, and inside it won't be an observable, so just a value. We can have two possible values. First of all it is string and secondly it is null, and by default I want to save here null. Why I wrote it like that? So first of all here by default we are not editing anything. This is why here we have a null. And then when we double click on something, we need to change this property to our ID, to our string that we double clicked. And then we can pass this information in every child, and our children always know are they active or not. And this is really simple. So here we have our editing ID, and now inside our main component HTML, here we have app to-dos to do, and we are passing here inside to do. But we can also pass something additionally here. So first of all, we can pass editing ID, but we can do even better. We can write here is editing, so this is a boolean, and here as a value we are writing editing ID, and this is our local property inside main, equals to do ID. So what's the point of this code? Actually, we don't want to give inside every element editing ID, because it doesn't make any sense. Our small to-do component should be almost stateless, so we don't care about editing ID there. But what we want to know if our component to-do is editing or not. This is why here we have a comparison, and this comparison gives us boolean, and we are passing this boolean inside. So now we need to jump inside our to-do and create here one more input. And this input will be is editing, and here I'm naming it is editing props, because I want to know that this is props and I know that this is boolean. Now we can use this property to render our input only when is editing is true. So let's jump inside our HTML, and here after div view I want to add here ng container. And here I have ngIf is editing props. So actually we're rendering this ng container only when is editing props is true. And this will be rendered automatically when we're changing in our main editing ID. Now inside we want to render our input, and here we will have class edit and also a value, but we will add it later. One more thing that we want to do here is to add inside our li one more class when we are in editing mode. This is why here I can write ng class like we already did previously, and here we have an object and here is a class editing. So I want to add this editing class when is editing props is inside true. And the point is that we will hide this part and only show this part in editing mode. But of course, when we look in browser, nothing new will be shown. So here we see only our not editing state. And the point is that by default, editing ID is null, and we didn't change it. So what we need now is on double click in this set to do in edit mode, change this editing ID. And this is exactly a task for outputs. So actually when we are in child and we want to pass some information to the parent, we're using outputs. So here we need to write output and here inside our name. So our name will be set editing ID. But the main problem is here that we want to rename this also and to show that this is output. Then we have a different name for output and this name set editing ID can be used inside our component. This is why here I want to write set editing ID event. So when I'm writing here at the end event, it means that this is an output. And here we know that this is event emitter because this is what we're using for events, and actually my import is not correct, so you really need to check this out. And inside we know that we have types string or null. And by default here we want to call new event emitter. So if you didn't know what outputs is, this is the way how we can emit something for parent. And actually what we are writing here inside emitter, this is our possible values. So we can emit some string like editing ID, or we can emit null when we want to close it or remove editing state. So here we have a new event emitter, and now inside our set to do in edit mode, we can call it, so it will be this set editing ID event, and here the most important is emit, because we can't really just call it directly, we can only call it through emit. And now inside we can pass some information. In our case we want to pass inside this to do props.id. Now we need in parent to react to our set editing ID. So I will copy this from here and jump inside main in HTML, and here inside app to do, I need to create new event set editing ID. Now here we need to provide a local function, and let's name it the same set editing ID, and here we need to write $event to get this ID inside the function. So let's jump in TS file and somewhere on the bottom create new function set editing ID. And we know that here we will get our editing ID and it can be string or null. And here we're returning void. So what we want to do here is just override this editing ID property and assign here our editing ID. Let's check if it's working. So here I'm reloading the page, I'm typing something, here we have our element, now I'm double clicking, and as you can see we're directly getting our input. Why is that? Because here inside our to-do component, on this function we emitted this event. And we listened for this event inside our main, and when it happened we set editing ID. When we are setting editing ID, we are passing in all our elements new is editing, when of course it is true. In our case, the first element that is rendered here has true. This is why we are jumping back inside to do, and here we are rendering this ng container with is editing props, because in this case is editing props is true. The next thing that I want to do is create directly all functions that we need inside HTML. So here I am inside to do component HTML and we have, for example, destroy. So on click, we actually need to remove our to do. This is why here I am attaching click and here we will have remove to do function. Let's create now this function inside component and just write console log inside. So we know that this function is already there. So here will be remove to do. The next thing that I want to do, we have this input with toggle. So here is type checkbox and we need here two things. First of all is checked, and here is the value directly from to do props is completed. So actually this input should be checked when our to do is completed. And we also need here a change, and on change we want to toggle our to do. So here let's name this function toggle to do. And I want to create now this function also inside component. So let's add it here. This is our toggle to do. And here we're returning void. And we just console log our toggle to do. And the last function that we need is of course key up and key enter. And just to remind you, here inside header, we already did that. Here we used in input value key up for change text and key enter to submit it. And we will do exactly the same logic here inside to do. So here we have our input for editing, and here I want first of all value, and here we need a property editing text. So this value is not existing yet, we will create it and assign by default for empty string. And also we need here two events. First of all, it will be key up, and when we're just typing, we want to change our text, so this editing text. This is why here I'm creating change text, and I'm passing inside event to read the value of the input. Now after this, I also need an event for key up.enter, and this will be our submitting. So here we will have change to do, and we don't need any parameters. So now first of all in to do, I want to create new function change text, and here we're getting an event of type event. So let's name it void, and here we have console log with change text. And now the next function that I will create here is our change to do. So this is update of our to-do that we're editing. So here also void, and inside console log change to do. So this is all functions that we need to implement now. So we binded all of them correctly, and let's check first if they are all there. So here I will just type something. Here let's check delete. I'm hitting something, remove to do is there. The next point is here we have our input, and actually it is undefined by default because we didn't create this editing text that we defined here. So this value is not there. This is why we just get undefined as a string. But the point is when we are typing, you can see here change text function, and when I'm hitting enter, here is change to do. So all our functions are binded correctly, and we just need to implement them. First of all, let's create this editing text property. So here inside component on the top, just below our output, we can create this property, and we know that this is of type string, and by default this is an empty string. But here is the point, we're getting here our to do, and we want actually to set here the value after we're getting it. And we can do it, for example, with ng on init. So here I am writing implements on init, and we can create here our ng on init function. So let's edit here, and on init, I want to write inside our editing text the value of to do. This is why here will be this editing text equals this to do props.text. So we're just reassigning our editing text on initialize every time when we're initializing to do component. Now let's check if it's working. So here I'm typing something, we're getting our element. Now when I'm clicking edit, as you can see we have our value from to do. So this part is working. Now we have our function change text, and actually here we want to change this text that we created, so editing text. So for this here on change text, we need to read the value, and we already did this inside our header. So here I want a value, and let's write here event.target, and we need to write as HTML input element. So we can read just our value directly from here. So our value is there, and we want to override our editing text with our value. Now we need to update our change to do. So this is the submission of our changing. And here is change to do, and I want first of all to log here this editing text, because this is the text that we changed. And secondly, we need to close our editing state. And for this we can write here this set editing ID event and just emit here a null. So in this case, we will set our editing ID to null, so we won't have any editing element, and it will be automatically re-rendered. So let's check this out. Here I am typing something, we have our first element, now I am editing it, now here we change the value, I will clean the console, and I'm hitting enter. As you can see, first of all we have change text, this is fine, and here is change to do with our new value. So as you can see, this is the new value, and our state here is not editing anymore. Obviously we have here the old value because we didn't change it yet, but we will do it in a second. The most important part that we closed our editing state, and here we have our value, so we can give this value to our service. Now the question is how we can change our item inside service, because there we're storing our data. So what I want to do here inside constructor, we need to inject our service. So let's add here constructor and add our service. And this is our to-dos service. And here is of type to-do service. And here now on the bottom, we can write before our emit, for example, this to-do service. And here we need to add new function, of course, change to-do. The question what we need to provide inside. First of all, new text, and secondly, the ID of the item that we want to change. So here will be this to-do props.id, so this is the ID of to-do, and secondly, we are passing inside this editing text. So this is our new text and ID, and this is enough information for us to update our to-do. So let's copy the name and jump inside to-do service. So here, let's jump to the bottom and somewhere after change filter, create our change to do function. So here we have two arguments. First of all, we have an ID, and this will be string. And secondly, we have text, it also will be string, and back we are getting void. Now the question is how we can update our to-dos. So we need to loop through the to-dos, find to-do by ID, and then update it. And we can do it exactly in a way how we did here inside toggle all. Actually, I will copy-paste this code because it will be almost the same. So I copied the whole code from toggle all, and here I pasted it inside change to do. So what we want to do here is to get updated to-dos. This is why we are reading the value with getValue here, and then we are mapping every element. So here if to-do ID equals ID, then we need to do some magic. And if it's not equals, then we just return our to-do, so we don't change anything. Now, if this to-do ID equals the ID that we want to change, so this ID, we need to update its text. This is why here I will return new to-do. And here I want to spread all properties of the to-do and just override here the property text. So what's going on here? We're looping with map through our to-dos. And here we have access for each to-do. And inside we are checking is this ID of to-do equals ID that we need to change. If not, then we simply return the to-do. But if yes, we are just spreading, so we're returning new object and we're spreading off values of our to-do and we override the text with text that we passed inside change to-do. So here we got our updated to-dos, which is a list of our to-dos, and now here we're writing these to-dos next to update our list of to-dos. Now let's check if it's working. So here I am in browser, I am typing something, this is our element, now I am editing it, and I am writing here 111, and I am hitting enter. As you can see, our element was updated and automatically re-rendered because we changed it inside our service, and all components that are listening for this behavioral subject were notified of changes and re-rendered. The next thing that we want to implement is removing of our elements. So here we have cross, and here is our console log remove to do. So let's jump back inside our to do, and here is our remove to do method. So we also want to create a new function inside service to remove elements from our array. This is why here we will just call this, and here will be to-do service. For example, let's name it remove to-do, and we must provide just ID inside because this is our unique identifier. So here we have this to-do props.id. So here we are passing our ID of to-do, and let's create remove to-do function inside our service. And actually it will look exactly the same like change to-do. So here is remove to-do, and we know that we are getting ID as a string, and we are returning here void. So what we want to do inside is just filter our to-dos. This is why here is our updated to-dos, and we want to get to-dos, and here we want to filter them. So here is just get value, and here we are calling filter directly on the array. So here we have access for every to-do, and we want to reject to-do with this ID. This is why here we are returning to-do ID doesn't equal ID. So in this case, we really use filter as a reject. So here we are rejecting if this to-do ID not equal ID. So this is our array of updated to-dos, and now we need to call these to-dos next to update our behavioral subject. So here is our updated to-dos, and let's check if it's working. So here I'm typing something, and now on the right we have this cross, and when I'm clicking, as you can see, we got to initial state, because this was just the only item. If we have, for example, 2 items here, and then we just remove one of them, so the second item stays there. So remove is working correctly, and we are just notifying our service that we need to update the array of data. And the last thing that we need to implement is toggle to do here on the left. So actually we are changing our checkbox, but we are not notifying our service. So let's do exactly the same. Here we are in our to-do component, and here is toggle to do. So we can create in our to-do service new function and call it toggle to do. And inside for toggling, we just need to provide an ID. This is why here this to-do props.id. Now let's create toggle to do function inside our service, for example, on the bottom. So here we are getting our ID of string, and here is void. So actually we want to do exactly the same what we did, for example, for update, or here for toggle to do. Actually, I will copy everything from toggle all, because it will be exactly the same. So we want to loop through our array and here return all elements as it is, or update the element if ID is the same like here. So what I want to do here is remove this code and just write return to do. So this is the default behavior. And now here we have our if. So if to do ID equals our ID, we want to update or toggle this property is completed. This is why here I am returning the spread of to do and I'm merging it with is completed. And here our is completed will be just inversed. So I will write here not to do is completed. So if it was true, it will be false and vice versa. So let's check this out. Here I am typing something, here is our element, I am checking something, and this text encounter was updated exactly because of this logic. So here our checkbox is just in HTML, but here we are subscribing to our list, and we know that we don't have other non-completed items. So actually we created all features of our to-do MVC, but here is the small thing that I want to improve. So when we are jumping to edit state, as you can see I can't directly type, and this is not good UI. This is why it will be really nice if we can add here focus. So actually to attach here focus, we need to work directly not with Angular, but with DOM. So what I want to do here is first of all jump in to do component HTML. I can add new child element. So here with hash I am writing text input, and now we can read the value of, for example, do focus inside our TS file. For this we need on the top to add here view child. So here we have a decorator view child, and here we're writing the name like it was inside HTML, and it was text input, and we know that text input is an element ref. And now we also need to import our view child. So all imports are there, and now we can work with this view child as with normal DOM element. The question is what we want to do with it and when. So normally when we're just typing something and we're double clicking here, the thing that is being changed is this is editing property, so this props. So we need to really listen to this is editing, and when it is changed to true, then we need to do our focus. And for this we can use Angular callback on changes. This is why here I am writing comma on changes. And let's create it here under our ng on init. So here is ng on changes, and here we are getting our changes, which are simple changes. And now here let's console log our changes so we can check what is it about. So here is our changes. Let's look in browser. We're just typing something, you can see our changes because here we got our to-do props. This is not interesting for us. But here when I am double clicking, you can see that we're getting changes again, and this is editing props, and it was changed from false to true. And this is exactly what we want to use. So here we can write if changes, And here we have is editing props dot current value, which means the new value. So for us is interesting when it is true, because then we have this editing mode. So if it is now true, we want to make a focus. And for this we need to write this text input native element focus. Let's check if it's working. So I'm reloading the page, typing something. Here is edit mode, and bam, we have an error. Native element of undefined. Actually, it is happening because our DOM element was not rendered yet, because as you remember, this input is inside ngIf. This is why here we need to wrap our code in setTimeout so it will work after the rendering. This is why here we are writing setTimeout, and here we have some function, and inside we just want to use this focus. And here, of course, we want to set second argument for 0, because we don't need any delay, we just need to make this after rendering. So let's check if it's working. So here I'm typing something, this is my element, I'm hitting double click, and as you can see, I directly got a focus. Because here is our ng on changes, and we're waiting for our isEditingProps current value. And when this is true, then we set timeout, we're focusing on our native element. So we successfully implemented together our Todo MVC. And yes, this is a small project, but even with small project, we can use a lot of advanced stuff and build everything correctly. And actually, if it was complicated for you or you want to really learn how to build projects with Angular, I have an advanced Angular course where we're building the real application from start to the end, and it is going 10 hours. And if you are interested, I will link it there on the description box below, so don't forget to check it out. And if you like this video and you want more content like this, don't forget to put thumbs up to support me, and of course subscribe to the channel. And if you didn't like this video, consider watching it once again on increased speed, that might also help. And I will see you in my next video.